a quiet archive record. Tonight, we're stepping into a slow unfolding. Settle in, let the outside world dissolve, and gently descend into tonight's world. In this documentary-style record, we move carefully through a public paper trail surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. Names that have been reported to appear in flight logs, contact books, address directories, calendars, and unsealed court filings. Each appearance can mean many things. A phone number in a book, a recorded flight scene, a forwarded message, a social introduction, or a legal mention. None of that is proof of a crime, and the same name can show up for different reasons in different sources. Our goal is not to accuse, but to map what is documented, what is alleged, what is disputed, and what remains unknown. We will go name by name, slowly, with restraint and with context. This is the Epstein list. Who appears? Chapter 1. The paper trail. Before any name is spoken, we need the frame. Epstein-related materials are not one single list. They are fragments, flight manifests kept by pilots and handlers, address books compiled over years, appointment notes, emails, and then later, legal exhibits and sworn statements that surfaced through reporting and court processes. A name can appear because someone knew someone, because a message passed through a crowded social circle, or because a journalist found a contact entry that never became a meeting. Even the sources have their own limits. Flight logs are often handwritten operational records. Dates, tail numbers, legs, passenger initials or full names, and sometimes ambiguity. Address books can be copied, merged, and passed along, with entries that may be aspirational, outdated, or never used. Calendars can show what was planned, not what happened. Court filings can include claims that are alleged and disputed, sometimes untested in a trial setting, sometimes settled, sometimes denied. This documentary-style record treats each category as a different kind of signal and tries not to turn any one signal into a verdict. Jeffrey Epstein, financier and convicted sex offender. His name anchors the entire record, but even here the paper trail is uneven. Wealth management claims, shifting business entities, and a network that changed over time. What is known is that he cultivated access to money and status while maintaining properties in multiple places. What remains contested repeatedly is what various associates knew, when they knew it, and what they participated in or ignored. Ghislaine Maxwell, socialite and long-time associate of Epstein, later convicted of sex trafficking-related charges. She is repeatedly reported in documents because she functioned as a connector, arranging dinners, making introductions, and managing social calendars. Court records and reporting describe her as central to recruiting and grooming, while she is denied wrongdoing and contested claims for years before her conviction. Her presence in materials is not incidental, it is structural. Sarah Kellen, often reported as a scheduler, an office figure in Epstein's world. Her name has been reported in address books and in accounts of how logistics were handled around residences and travel. Public reporting suggests she managed appointments and communications, which can place her name across many fragments. What is not settled in a single document is the full scope of her authority versus her administrative role. Nadia Marcinkova, frequently described in reporting as a close associate who was around Epstein for years. Her name has been reported in connection with travel and household operations, and in the broader public narrative about the inner circle. She has been mentioned in civil litigation reporting, with disputed allegations about her role. What is clear is that she has been placed near the center by multiple sources, but many specifics remain alleged rather than proven in publicly released documents. Alfredo Rodriguez, former employee, reported in news coverage as a long-time Butler-Schen household staff member who at one point possessed an address book later described as important to the paper trail. His name appears in the record because the documents themselves became objects of conflict. Who had them? Who moved them? Who tried to monetize them? And what law enforcement did with them? Employment is not proof of complicity, but staff can become accidental custodians of evidence. Juan Alessi, former house manager, reported in media interviews and in litigation-era narratives as someone who described the rhythms of properties and the flow of visitors. Names like this appear because the system had routines, arrivals, departures, schedules, and rules. Such accounts are part testimony, part memory, and part the human texture that raw documents lack. What remains unknown is how much any single staff member could safely challenge. Jean-Luc Brunel, French modeling agent, reported to appear in Epstein-related contact materials and widely discussed in international reporting. Multiple allegations described him as a procurer of young women, and he faced legal jeopardy in France before his death in custody. His connections are often described as bridging fashion circles and recruitment pipelines. The paper trail shows association. The criminal allegations were contested and litigated in other jurisdictions. Donald Trump, business figure and former US president, reported to appear in Epstein-related address book entries and discussed in media coverage of their past social overlap. Reporting has described them as moving in similar Palm Beach and New York circles during the 1990s. Trump has said he was not a fan of Epstein and that they had a falling out. The appearance of his name in contact-style material is treated by journalists as evidence of a social connection, not proof of criminal conduct. Bill Clinton, former US president, reported by multiple outlets to have traveled on Epstein's plane on certain occasions, based on flight logs. Clinton has stated through representatives that he knew nothing of Epstein's crimes and that the trips were connected to foundation work. The flight logs are a kind of mechanical record, but they do not describe what happened at destinations or in conversations. His name appears as part of the broader pattern of Epstein courting influential figures. Prince Andrew, British royal, repeatedly cited in unsealed filings and in public allegations, including claims by Virginia Giuffre. His connection to Epstein has been reported through photographs, social events, and accounts of time spent together. Prince Andrew has denied allegations of wrongdoing and reached a civil settlement without admitting liability. His name appears because the controversy around him became one of the most scrutinized parts of the Epstein story. Alan Dershowitz, lawyer and legal scholar, reported to appear in flight logs and contested allegations in civil litigation. He has vigorously denied wrongdoing and pursued legal action against accusers, emphasizing that appearances in logs or claims in filings are not proof. His prominence in the paper trail comes from being both a known associate and a public combatant over allegations. The known versus alleged boundary is especially sharp around his name. Leslie Wexner, billionaire retail executive, widely reported as a major benefactor and client whose ties to Epstein were financial and structural. Reporting has described Epstein managing money for Wexner and gaining extraordinary access to assets, including the New York townhouse. Wexner has said he severed ties and has described being misled. His appearance in the record illustrates how institutional power can be transferred through trust, before anyone understands the cost. Leon Black, financier and former Apollo executive, reported to have paid Epstein for purported tax and estate planning advice, as covered by major investigations and media reporting. Black has acknowledged the payments and stated that the advice was legitimate, while public scrutiny questioned judgment and due diligence. His name appears because financial transactions, unlike rumors, leave a trackable imprint. What remains debated is whether the relationship was purely advisory or reflected deeper complicity. Ehud Barak, former Israeli Prime Minister, reported by journalists to have met Epstein multiple times and to have visited Epstein's New York residence. Barak has publicly said he met Epstein as part of philanthropic and scientific interests and denied any involvement in criminal conduct. His documented presence in reporting shows Epstein's reach into international political spheres. The gap between met and knew is the central uncertainty. Bill Gates, technology founder and philanthropist, reported to have met Epstein on multiple occasions after Epstein's conviction, according to widespread media coverage. Gates has said he regrets the meetings and that it was a mistake in judgment. His name appears because the association was documented and later discussed by Gates and by investigative outlets. The record shows access and networking, not a direct allegation of criminal acts in the public materials. Glenn Dubin, hedge fund manager, reported in multiple sources as part of Epstein's network, including social contact materials and media investigations. Dubin and his family have said they were unaware of Epstein's wrongdoing at the time and have denied any suggestion of misconduct. His presence in the paper trail reflects how Epstein embedded himself among wealthy families. What is known is association. What is unknown is what was seen, ignored, or misunderstood in private settings. Eva Anderson Dubin, physician and former model, reported in media coverage as connected through social circles and friendships with Maxwell and Epstein. Her name appears because the Epstein story often overlaps with high society networks, where spouses and families are also part of the contact environment. Public statements have denied wrongdoing and emphasized distance from criminal activity. The documents that mention social links do not resolve what any individual knew. Thomas Pritzker, business executive, reported in some published contact lists and journalism that catalogued names in address book-style materials. Appearance in an address book can mean anything from a single introduction to a long relationship. Publicly, such entries are often treated as a snapshot of Epstein's ambition to collect influential contacts. What remains unknown is the frequency and depth of any interaction beyond an entry. Mortimer Zuckerman, media and real estate figure, reported to appear in published address book collections. His inclusion is typically used as an example of the kind of establishment figure Epstein sought proximity to. Without additional context, a contact entry does not indicate wrongdoing. The paper trail here is a reminder. Names can be part of a social inventory, not a confession. George Mitchell, former US Senator, reported to have been named in legal filings and media stories connected to Epstein allegations. Mitchell denied wrongdoing, and the public record includes dispute and rebuttal around claims. His name illustrates how court documents can mention prominent figures in the course of broader allegations. A mention in a filing is not the same as a finding. John Glenn, US Senator and astronaut, reported to have appeared in some published address book material. Such entries are often interpreted as Epstein collecting prestigious names to bolster his own legitimacy. There is typically little public evidence that a listed individual had meaningful involvement. The unknown is whether contact ever moved beyond an entry. Henry Kissinger, former US Secretary of State, reported to appear in some published contact materials. In compilations of address book-style records, such a name often functions as a symbol of establishment reach. A listing does not prove a meeting, and it certainly does not prove criminal conduct. The appearance, where reported, demonstrates how Epstein curated an aura of geopolitical access. Madeleine Albright, former US Secretary of State, similarly reported in some contact list compilations. High-level political names can appear because their offices, foundations, and staff are part of a public-facing ecosystem. A contact entry may represent an institution more than a personal relationship. The record shows the kind of influence Epstein wanted to be adjacent to. Richard Branson, entrepreneur, reported in some media compilations of Epstein contact materials and discussed in the wider narrative of elite social circles. Branson has spoken publicly about encountering Epstein socially and has distanced himself from him. The appearance of his name is usually treated as an example of Epstein orbiting high-profile innovators. The available public material does not prove criminal conduct. Ariane de Rothschild, name reported to appear in some published contact materials, reflecting how Epstein's network was mapped into banking and European elite circles. A listing can stem from introductions, philanthropy, or reputational name collecting. Publicly available documents often do not clarify whether meetings occurred. The uncertainty is built into the genre of the document itself. David Koch, industrialist, reported in some contact list publications. In such cases, the paper trail is often an index of status rather than a record of actions. The existence of a name does not establish relationship length or closeness. This is the recurring caution that follows us through the chapters. Prince Mohammed bin Salman, name reported in some address book publications, often cited in press coverage of the breadth of Epstein's claimed reach. With many entries, it is unclear whether the contact was direct, aspirational, or mediated through intermediaries. The public record, when it is only a listing, does not show wrongdoing. It shows how Epstein curated the image of access. Finally, a note on Virginia Giuffre. She is not merely a name in a list, but one of the most prominent accusers whose allegations shaped unsealed filings and public understanding. Her role in the paper trail is that she gave sworn accounts and made specific claims against specific people. Some claims were litigated, some were settled, and some were denied. Her presence in documents is the reason many other names became publicly discussed at all. Chapter 2: Politics and Power. In politics, proximity is a currency. Epstein appeared to understand that if he could be photographed near power, or host a dinner where power sat comfortably, he could convert that image into more invitations. This chapter moves through political names that have been publicly reported in connection with Epstein-related documents and reporting. While keeping the boundary clear, appearing in logs or books does not equal participation in crimes. Bill Clinton, former US president, reported to appear in flight logs for certain trips. Media reporting has described itineraries that included international travel. with Clinton's representatives stating these were connected to Foundation work and that Clinton knew nothing of Epstein's crimes. The documents record movement, not intent. The unknown is what conversations occurred and what impressions were formed. Hillary Clinton, former US Secretary of State, whose name has been reported in some published contact materials and in the broader context of Clinton World Associations. In many cases, such listings reflect the ecosystem around a political family rather than evidence of direct interaction. Public reporting has not established criminal allegations against her connected to Epstein. The inclusion illustrates the way Epstein's papers captured entire networks, not just individuals. Donald Trump, former US president, reported in address book publications and discussed as a one-time social acquaintance in Palm Beach and New York. Trump has said he distanced himself and was not a fan of Epstein. The public record includes photographs and social event references, but those are not proof of crimes. The important distinction is between being in the same social scene and being part of illegal conduct. Ivana Trump, name reported in some address book style publications, often as part of social directory entries. Such appearances may reflect the broader social circles of New York and Palm Beach in a given era. The public documents do not, by themselves, indicate any wrongdoing. The unknown is whether any contact entry represented an active relationship. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., public figure reported to appear in some published contact materials, reflecting Epstein's interest in political names across party lines. A contact entry could be aspirational, a brief introduction, or more. Public reporting has not established criminal allegations tied to his name in Epstein materials. The listing, where it exists, shows the breadth of names Epstein wanted nearby. Andrew Cuomo, former New York governor, reported in some address book publications. Such entries are often used by journalists to demonstrate how Epstein's contacts spanned institutions. There is not necessarily a documented narrative of interaction in the public record beyond the listing. The unknown remains whether any entry translated into a meeting. Eliot Spitzer, former New York governor, reported in some published contact materials in certain compilations. New York politics, law enforcement, finance, and media share corridors, and a directory can capture that overlap without explaining it. A contact entry is not an accusation. It is a hint that the name existed in Epstein's map of power. John Kerry, US Senator and Secretary of State, reported to appear in some contact list compilations. High-ranking officials can appear as contacts because staff, donors, and intermediaries create layers of connection. A listing does not show personal intimacy or wrongdoing. It shows the kind of access Epstein wanted to claim. Tony Blair, former UK Prime Minister, widely reported to have met Epstein after Epstein's conviction, with media coverage describing meetings and contacts. Blair has said he met Epstein in relation to philanthropic initiatives and has denied wrongdoing. The reported relationship is controversial, largely because of the timing and the optics. The known is that meetings occurred. The unknown is what was discussed behind closed doors. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister, reported in some contact list publications and discussed in broader reporting about Epstein's international interests. A contact entry could reflect an introduction through mutual associates rather than personal relationship. Publicly available documents do not establish criminal allegations tied to Netanyahu in this context. The appearance is more about Epstein's claimed reach than about documented conduct. Ehud Barak, former Israeli Prime Minister, reported by journalists as having met Epstein and visited his residence. Barak has denied any involvement in wrongdoing and has framed the meetings as related to philanthropic or scientific interests. His name persists because it is supported by multiple independent reports. The remaining uncertainty is what each party expected to gain from the association. George Mitchell, former senator, named in some legal contexts and media coverage connected to Epstein allegations. Mitchell denied wrongdoing, and the public record includes disputes around accusations. His case shows how allegations can attach to prominent names through civil litigation narratives. The legal mention itself is not proof, but it becomes part of public memory. Bill Richardson, former governor and US ambassador, reported to have been named in unsealed filings related to Epstein. Richardson denied wrongdoing before his death, and the claims were part of broader allegations in civil proceedings. His appearance demonstrates how court documents can surface names that were not previously central in press coverage. The unknown is what the full truth would be if every claim could be tested in court. Janine Pirro, public figure, reported to appear in some contact book publications. In such situations, the entry may reflect media and political circles where Epstein sought visibility. Publicly available documents do not establish wrongdoing from the listing alone. The presence illustrates the overlap between celebrity media and politics. Ted Kennedy, late US Senator, reported to appear in some address book compilations. The significance in journalistic framing is often symbolic. Epstein keeping the contact details of major political families. A listing does not establish meetings or misconduct. It shows, again, the collecting impulse. Newt Gingrich, politician, reported in some published contact materials. Such entries can reflect donor networks and speaking circuits where names circulate. There is no public proof of wrongdoing in the mere presence of an entry. The unknown is the depth of any direct relationship. Rudy Giuliani, former New York City mayor, reported to appear in some compilations of contact materials. New York's elite networks frequently overlap with media, finance, and law, making such listings unsurprising in a purely social sense. A name in a book is not an allegation. It is a trace of possible access. George Stephanopoulos, journalist and former political aide, reported to appear in some published contact lists. Media figures can appear because Epstein pursued influence through press and reputation management. Public documents do not necessarily show direct wrongdoing. The presence suggests that Epstein kept tabs on gatekeepers. Rahm Emanuel, political figure, reported to appear in some contact list publications in certain compilations. For politicians and high-level staff, the boundary between personal and institutional contact can be blurry. Offices, fundraising circles, and intermediaries can place a name in a directory without any meaningful personal relationship. The appearance, where reported, remains a weak signal. Kirsten Gillibrand, US Senator, reported in some contact list publications, representing how broad such directories can be. In many cases, the more famous the institution, the more likely a name appears somewhere in a web of introductions. Public reporting has not established criminal allegations tied to her in Epstein materials. The appearance is a reminder of scale, not a verdict. This chapter leaves us with a slow, uneasy point. Epstein's story is not only about private crimes, but also about public failures. How institutions, reputations, and incentives can create blind spots. Yet the paper trail does not tell us who saw the danger, who missed it, and who never crossed the threshold at all. Chapter 3: Royalty, Society, and Status. In the social world that Epstein cultivated, status was a language. He used architecture, art, jets, and dinners to signal that he belonged. In these circles, introductions can be effortless and documentation can be shallow, because the social ritual is more important than the paperwork. Here we move through names reported in connection with Epstein materials and public reporting, emphasizing again that appearances are not proof of crimes. Prince Andrew, Duke of York, whose association with Epstein became globally scrutinized. His name appears repeatedly in reporting and legal filings, notably through Virginia Giuffre's allegations, which he denied. He later reached a civil settlement without admitting liability, and his public role was dramatically reduced. The known is the documented association. The disputed is the alleged conduct. Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, reported in media coverage as having social connections in the same orbit, with accounts of financial assistance connected to Epstein. Public reporting has discussed controversies around money and introductions, though the details vary across sources. She has not been convicted of crimes connected to Epstein. The appearance of her name reflects how royal-adjacent networks can intersect with wealthy patrons. Prince Charles. Now, King Charles III, reported to have been mentioned in some contact list publications and general reporting about Epstein's aspirational access to elites. A listing does not establish a relationship, and there is not a public record demonstrating criminal conduct tied to him. The significance is often symbolic. The suggestion that Epstein kept or sought royal contacts. The unknown is whether the connection was real, indirect, or merely name-collecting. Princess Diana, late royal figure, reported in some address book-style publications. When such a name appears, it often reflects the era and the social geography of the elites Epstein wanted to be near. There is no evidence that a listing indicates personal involvement in wrongdoing. The appearance can function as a shock of recognition rather than a reliable narrative. Prince Albert of Monaco. Name reported to appear in some published contact lists. For international social circles, such entries can reflect formal introductions, charity events, or aspirational collecting. Public materials do not prove wrongdoing from a listing alone. The uncertainty is whether any direct contact occurred. Queen Rania of Jordan. Name reported in some address book publications, often cited as an example of how wide the directory reached. A contact entry does not establish personal relationship or misconduct. It may reflect an attempt to compile high-profile global names. The known is only that the name has been reported as appearing in such material. Aga Khan, prominent religious leader, reported in some contact list compilations. Epstein's circle included philanthropists and global figures, where charity events can create momentary proximity. The appearance of a name does not establish anything beyond possible access. The unknown is whether any relationship went beyond superficial encounter. Prince Michael of Greece. Name reported in some published contact materials, reflecting European aristocratic networks. Such circles often overlap with finance and philanthropy, which were Epstein's preferred avenues. No public document proves wrongdoing from such an entry. The listing suggests the kind of social stage Epstein wanted. Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, businesswoman and philanthropist, reported in some public coverage of Epstein-era social networks and, in some cases, in contact material publications. Elite philanthropy and political fundraising often produce overlapping guest lists. A reported association does not establish criminal conduct. The record mainly shows that Epstein moved through environments where her name was present. Mortimer Zuckerman. While not royalty, he is part of the status architecture, media ownership, real estate, and institutional legitimacy. His reported appearance in contact materials demonstrates how Epstein treated influence as collectible. There is no public proof of wrongdoing from the listing. The unknown is whether any contact went beyond the kind of introduction that happens constantly in elite spaces. Naomi Campbell, model and celebrity, reported to have attended events connected to Epstein and to have appeared in some flight log-related reporting. Campbell has said she was unaware of Epstein's crimes at the time and has denied wrongdoing. Her name appears because fashion and philanthropy events created a bridge between glamour and money. The known is social proximity. The unknown is what she perceived or understood. Tatiana Okupnik and other models reported in some media narratives around the broader social environment. In many cases, the public record is fragmented. A mention in a book, a reference in an article, or a photograph at an event. A name can appear because Epstein and his associates operated in settings where models were present. The absence of clear documentation can leave a fog of insinuation that we must resist. Wendy Deng Murdoch, media-connected figure, reported in some published contact materials and discussed in the larger landscape of high society networking. A contact entry can represent a shared event circuit rather than intimacy. Public materials do not establish wrongdoing from the listing. The listing, where reported, shows the breadth of Epstein's social bookkeeping. Rupert Murdoch, media executive, reported in some address book compilations. Such names often appear because Epstein collected gatekeepers to information and narrative. The appearance of a name in a directory is not evidence of a relationship or misconduct. It reflects the idea of influence as a phone number. Cameron Diaz, celebrity name, reported in some published contact lists, often cited to show how entertainment names were mixed into the directory. The presence of a celebrity entry can be purely aspirational, outdated, or peripheral. There is no public proof of wrongdoing from the listing. The unknown is whether the entry reflects any actual interaction. Mick Jagger, musician, reported in some contact list publications. Epstein was known to seek proximity to cultural icons as social capital. A listing is a weak signal. It may be a route of introduction rather than evidence of meeting. The record is about names, not acts. Tommy Hilfiger, fashion designer, reported to appear in some published contact materials. In the fashion world, connections can be mediated by agents, publicists, and charity event circuits, leaving names in address books with minimal direct contact. A listing is not proof of wrongdoing. It reflects, again, the overlap of glamour and wealth that Epstein pursued. Princess Beatrice, royal figure sometimes mentioned in broader social reporting, though the extent of direct documentation is often unclear. When a name appears in this environment, it can be through family networks rather than direct contact. Public documents do not establish wrongdoing from such mentions. The uncertain boundary between public gossip and documented connection is especially risky here. Princess Eugenie, similarly, reported in some media discussions because of family and social proximity, not necessarily because of documented personal ties to Epstein. The public record does not establish criminal allegations against her in this context. This is a good place to say it again. Our job is to describe what is publicly reported to appear, not to infer guilt. This chapter is less about direct evidence and more about how Epstein built a mask. The mask looked like status. The documents show that he tried to stitch himself into the tapestry of the famous, the titled, and the untouchable. Chapter 4: Money, Business, and Philanthropy. If politics is power, money is the infrastructure of power. Epstein's documented relationships often passed through finance. Advisory payments, donations, introductions to investors, and access to wealthy patrons. Here we move through business and philanthropy names, reported in Epstein-related materials and journalism, again with careful language and no assumption of crimes. Leslie Wexner, billionaire executive whose relationship with Epstein has been heavily reported. Epstein managed money for Wexner and gained unusual control over assets, according to multiple investigations. Wexner has stated he was misled and severed ties, and his organizations later took steps to distance from Epstein. His name appears because finance leaves an imprint and because the relationship was central to Epstein's rise. Leon Black, financier, reported to have paid Epstein substantial sums for advisory services, as documented in investigations and reporting. Black acknowledged the payments and framed them as legitimate professional advice, while public scrutiny questioned his judgment in working with Epstein post-conviction. The record is concrete in terms of payments, but motives and knowledge remain debated. This is an example where the paper trail exists, but interpretation is contested. Jess Staley, banker whose name has been widely reported in connection with Epstein through investigations and corporate governance inquiries, including reporting about past interactions. Staley has denied certain characterizations, while financial institutions faced questions about what internal knowledge existed and how relationships were managed. His appearance in the record is a reminder that gatekeepers of finance are also gatekeepers of access. J.P. Morgan Chase, frequently discussed in reporting and litigation as one of the financial institutions through which Epstein maintained accounts and relationships. Mentioning a bank is not the same as alleging criminal intent by every person inside it, but the institutional role matters. Compliance, reporting obligations, and decisions about whether to keep a client. The paper trail in finance is often emails, account files, and internal review documents that only partially reach the public. Deutsche Bank, similarly, has been reported as another institution involved in Epstein's later banking relationships, with public scrutiny focused on oversight and compliance failures. The story here is often about systems, what was flagged, what was ignored, and what was tolerated because money flowed. The documents that become public tend to be the edges of a much larger internal record. Wilbur Ross, business executive and former US Commerce Secretary, reported to appear in some published contact materials. In address books, such entries can reflect a banker-to-banker introduction, a shared donor circuit, or simply a name captured for potential access. A listing is not proof of wrongdoing. It is a reminder that corporate and political pathways frequently overlap in a single directory. Ronald Perelman, billionaire investor and art world figure, reported to appear in some contact list compilations. Epstein's circle, as described by journalists, often crossed through art, real estate, and finance, where the same small set of names recur. The appearance of a name in a book does not establish a personal relationship or misconduct. It shows the gravitational pull of elite networks. Shell companies and trusts are part of the money story, even when they are not names in the celebrity sense. Reporting has repeatedly described how wealth can be routed through entities that obscure beneficial ownership and decision-making. This is not an allegation about any one entity. It is context for why financial paper trails can be simultaneously detailed and incomplete. Stephen Hoffenberg, financier and convicted fraudster, reported historically as connected to Epstein early on in career narratives. Their association is mentioned in some biographies and investigative accounts that trace Epstein's path through financial schemes and relationships. Hoffenberg's statements about Epstein have been disputed and interpreted through the lens of his own criminal history. His name appears as part of an origin story that remains partly opaque. Thomas Pritzker, business leader, reported in some published contact lists. In large address books, corporate leaders can appear because their offices are reachable through public channels or mutual contacts. A listing does not show a financial relationship. The unknown is whether the entry reflects actual interaction or merely potential access. David Koch, industrialist, reported in some contact list publications. Epstein's directory often reads like a museum of wealth, with names included for prestige. There is no public proof of wrongdoing from such a listing. The entry, where reported, shows the kind of ecosystem Epstein wanted to inhabit. Mort Zuckerman. Again, wealth and media power overlap. Reported appearance in contact materials suggests Epstein kept a map of influential owners and editors. Without corroborating context, it does not show a personal relationship. It shows a network ambition. Peter Thiel, technology investor, reported in some contact list publications and discussed in broader reporting about elite tech circles. A contact entry can reflect a meeting, a referral, or a passing mention. Public materials do not establish wrongdoing from an entry alone. The unknown is whether any association existed beyond being in the same universe of wealth and ideas. Reid Hoffman, technology investor, reported in some address book-related reporting. Tech philanthropy and academic funding often intersect with the types of salons Epstein hosted. A listing does not establish attendance at those salons. It demonstrates how Epstein's contact net reached into contemporary power centers. A Mark Andreessen, investor, reported in some contact list publications. Many prominent investors appear in directories because they are targets for introductions and influence campaigns. There is no public proof of wrongdoing based on a listing. The entry illustrates how Epstein tried to position himself as a gatekeeper between money and ideas. Bill Gates, founder and philanthropist, reported to have met Epstein multiple times after Epstein's conviction. Gates has said he regrets the meetings and has characterized them as a mistake in judgment. His name appears because the association was reported and later publicly acknowledged in part. The known is meetings. The unknown is what Epstein offered and why the door was opened. Dustin Moskovitz, technology figure, reported in some contact list publications. A directory entry can reflect the porous boundaries of elite networks where philanthropy and tech convene. Public documents do not show wrongdoing from an entry. The appearance suggests that Epstein collected contemporary tech names as he once collected Wall Street names. Sergey Brin, technology founder, reported in some published contact materials. High-profile tech names can appear because of philanthropic overlap and social introductions. The listing does not establish a relationship or misconduct. The unknown is whether any entry was ever used. Larry Page, similarly, reported to appear in some compilations. Epstein's interest in tech and science made these names desirable to him. A contact entry is a weak signal. It shows aspiration and reach, not guilt. Michael Bloomberg, business figure and former New York mayor, reported in some contact list publications. New York elite circles overlap tightly, so contact entries can be common and not indicative of closeness. Public materials do not prove wrongdoing. The listing shows that Epstein tracked influential New Yorkers. George Soros, investor and philanthropist, reported to appear in some contact list publications. Such a name can appear for the same reason: influence, philanthropy, and political networks. A listing does not establish meetings or misconduct. It demonstrates the breadth of names Epstein wanted in his orbit. Carly Khan, investor, reported in some published contact materials. Finance circles are dense, and contact lists can include many entries that never become relationships. There is no public proof of wrongdoing from a listing. The entry suggests Epstein tracked major players. Kenneth Griffin, hedge fund manager, reported in some contact list compilations. In such cases, the document is often more about potential access than realized partnership. Public materials do not establish wrongdoing. The unknown is whether the listing represented any meaningful contact. Glenn Dubin, hedge fund manager, reported across multiple sources as part of Epstein's social and financial environment. Dubin and his family have denied wrongdoing and said they were unaware of Epstein's crimes. His appearance illustrates how Epstein embedded himself among wealthy families through trust and proximity. The public record shows association, not proven criminal involvement. Jeffrey Epstein's foundations and philanthropic vehicles have been reported as tools for legitimacy. Many donors and recipients may be listed in charity contexts, which can create confusion about who endorsed what. A donation ledger does not equal moral approval, but it can show how reputations were borrowed. What remains unknown is how many institutions performed due diligence and how many simply enjoyed the funding. Coutts and other banks appear in reporting because money requires channels. Financial institutions are often discussed in investigations as part of how Epstein moved funds, maintained accounts, and sustained an image of legitimacy. This is not a claim that any particular bank committed crimes. It is a recognition that systems enable individuals. The paper trail here is often partial and shaped by what investigators could access. Victoria's Secret network appears because of Wexner's world, which intersected with modelling and recruitment narratives in some reporting. It is crucial to be careful. Corporate associations do not equate to criminal acts by all involved. Still, the overlap between fashion, money, and gatekeeping is part of how Epstein's environment is described. The unknown is how much was seen by people at different layers. Philanthropic salons, the dinners, the science conversations, the invitation-only gatherings reported by various journalists are the soft money of influence. Names can appear because someone attended once, or because Epstein claimed they would attend. Public reporting sometimes relies on memory, guest lists, and secondary corroboration. The uncertainty is always whether a claimed connection was real or embellished. This chapter is heavy because it shows the infrastructure Epstein leaned on. The expectation that wealthy people meet, talk, invest, donate, and move on. In that churn, accountability can blur, and the paper trail becomes the only witness that does not forget. Chapter 5. Science, Culture, and Celebrity. Epstein's self-presentation often included science and culture, conversations with academics, donations to institutions, and proximity to celebrities. For some, he offered money. For others, he offered access to money. Here we go, name by name, through figures reported to appear in related materials and widely covered reporting, while remaining careful about what is known and what is not. Marvin Minsky, AI pioneer, whose name was mentioned in connection with Epstein through reporting and unsealed documents that included allegations by an accuser. Minsky died before any courtroom testing of such claims could occur, and his estate has disputed wrongdoing. His presence in the public record reflects Epstein's interest in famous scientists and the uncomfortable questions raised by such proximity. The known is that Epstein cultivated academic relationships. The disputed is any specific alleged conduct. Stephen Hawking, physicist reported by media to have attended an event connected to Epstein, including a conference setting. Hawking's appearance in reporting is often cited as an example of Epstein's access to scientific prestige. There is no public proof that Hawking was involved in criminal acts, and his presence in a photo or event record is not an allegation. The listing or mention is about reputational proximity. Lawrence Krauss, physicist, reported in some media coverage of Epstein's science circles. Epstein's efforts to fund or befriend scientists created a web where names appear because of donations, dinners, or introductions. Public materials do not establish wrongdoing from association alone. The unknown is how much individuals understood about Epstein while participating in events. Stephen Pinker, psychologist, reported to have been connected to the broader Epstein science network in media discussions, often in terms of attending gatherings or being in contact lists. Pinker has publicly addressed questions about association, and the debate often centers on social judgment rather than criminal allegations. A name appearing in communications or calendars can indicate contact, not complicity. The record is about connections, not conclusions. George Church, geneticist, reported in some media narratives about Epstein's interest in genetics and ambitious, sometimes controversial ideas. Epstein's funding and networking in science communities have been documented in various investigative reports. Public reporting about Church focuses on interactions and the ethics of accepting access, not proven criminal involvement. The unknown is the private content of conversations that the documents do not capture. John Brockman, literary agent and ideas impresario, reported in media coverage of Epstein's intellectual salons and networks. Brockman's world, as described by journalists, connected scientists, technologists, and patrons through dinners and curated conversations. A reported invitation or contact does not prove wrongdoing. It shows how Epstein tried to insert himself into the machinery that turns academic reputations into cultural power. Douglas Rushkoff, writer and professor, reported to have described being invited to meetings framed as philanthropic or advisory conversations, later reflecting publicly on the experience. His name appears because first-person accounts can illuminate what documents cannot. The vibe in the room, the pitch being made, the subtle pressure to normalize an association. Such accounts are still one person's memory, but they become part of the archive. Edge-style salons, a broader pattern reported by multiple writers. Small dinners, big names, grand topics, and a financier positioning himself as a patron of discovery. In these settings, people can be present for curiosity, networking, or funding, without any connection to criminal conduct. The ethical question that remains and echoes across institutions is how long a social circle can ignore a reputation warning when the conversation feels important. Noam Chomsky, linguist and public intellectual, reported in some media coverage as having had meetings or correspondence within the broader academic social network around Epstein. Chomsky has addressed questions publicly, and the debate has centered on whether meeting a disgraced financier for conversation was ethical or naive. A reported meeting is not proof of criminal conduct. The record here is about how intellectual prestige can be courted. Joy Ito, former MIT Media Lab director, whose relationship with Epstein became a public scandal through investigative reporting. Ito acknowledged errors in judgment regarding Epstein's involvement and resigned, and MIT conducted reviews of fundraising practices. Ito's name appears because institutional processes left records, emails, donations, meetings. The known is that Epstein found pathways into respected institutions. The unknown is how many people quietly accepted that pathway. MIT Media Lab donors and intermediaries appear in reporting as part of a system that allowed Epstein to channel money and influence. Individual names can surface in emails and donation discussions without implying criminality. The relevance is institutional. Who took meetings, who accepted funds, who asked questions, and who did not. The paper trail here is often administrative but morally charged. Boris Nikolic, physician and science advisor, reported in some coverage because of a role connected to Epstein's estate planning documents. His name appears in the public narrative as an example of how Epstein sought legitimacy by surrounding himself with people who had real scientific credentials. Public reporting has not established criminal wrongdoing by Nikolic connected to Epstein. The relevance is proximity and the strange afterlife of legal paperwork. Woody Allen, filmmaker, reported in some published contact list materials. In directories that contain many entertainment names, it can be unclear whether entries represent actual relationships. Publicly available documents do not establish wrongdoing connected to Epstein from an entry alone. The appearance reflects Epstein's tendency to collect cultural figures. Kevin Spacey, actor, reported in some flight log-related reporting as having traveled with Epstein, along with other celebrities. Spacey has faced separate legal controversies unrelated to Epstein, which can distort how people interpret any mention of his name. The flight log record, where reported, indicates travel, not necessarily illegal activity. The unknown is the context and purpose of any trip. Chris Tucker, comedian and actor, reported in some flight log coverage as part of a group that included Clinton on certain trips. Tucker has not been charged with crimes related to Epstein in the public record, and appearances in a manifest do not prove wrongdoing. His name appears because manifests can capture an odd mix of people in a single itinerary. The record shows association in transit, not intent. David Copperfield, magician, reported to have been mentioned in deposition or court-related materials in ways that drew public attention. He has denied wrongdoing in relation to any claims connected to Epstein narratives. His presence in the public record demonstrates how allegations can surface through litigation, even when facts remain contested. The known is that his name was mentioned. The disputed is the substance. Courtney Love, musician, reported in some published contact lists. Celebrity directories often contain names that are aspirational or peripheral, and the public record may not establish interaction. A contact entry is not proof of wrongdoing. The unknown is whether the entry reflects anything beyond a phone number. Alec Baldwin, actor, reported to appear in some published contact materials. Entertainment and New York social circuits overlap, making it possible for many names to exist in a directory without meaningful contact. Public materials do not show wrongdoing from the listing. The appearance is another example of breadth. Kate Blanchett, actress, reported in some address book-style publications. Such entries often become sensational because they suggest a wider web than people expect. But the documents do not explain whether a meeting occurred. The listing is not an allegation. Dustin Hoffman, actor, reported in some published contact materials. As with other celebrity names, the public record may not clarify the nature of any connection. A name can be present because a contact was shared or copied. The unknown remains whether any relationship existed. Ralph Fiennes, actor, reported in some published contact lists. Epstein's papers, as reported, often included entertainment names, because celebrity is another form of power. A contact entry does not show wrongdoing. It shows the kind of social capital Epstein tracked. Bob Weinstein, film executive, reported to appear in some contact materials, sometimes alongside broader Hollywood networks. It is important not to conflate separate scandals or assume guilt by adjacency. A listing indicates that a name existed in the directory. It does not prove any criminal act. Harvey Weinstein, reported in some contact list publications. Weinstein's own criminal convictions are separate from the Epstein story, but the overlap in elite circles can lead to rhetorical shortcuts. The presence of a name in an address book does not establish an Epstein-related crime. The record here is about a shared ecosystem of power, not a shared charge. George Lucas, filmmaker, reported in some contact list compilations. High-profile cultural figures appear in large directories for many reasons, including aspirational collecting. Public materials do not prove wrongdoing from an entry alone. The unknown is whether contact ever occurred. Michael Jackson, singer, reported in some published contact materials in certain compilations. Given Jackson's own controversial history, any mention can be emotionally charged, but we must stay disciplined. A listing is not proof of anything. The appearance, where reported, reflects Epstein's compilation practices. The unknown is whether the entry reflected genuine connection. Mick Jagger, musician, reported to appear in some address book publications. Epstein's interest in iconic names is well documented as a social strategy. A directory entry is not a moral verdict. It is a trace of the kind of world he tried to inhabit. Tom Hanks, actor, reported in some published contact list materials in certain compilations. Many such lists are broad and include names without context, which can fuel speculation. Public documents do not establish wrongdoing from a listing. The unknown is whether it was an accurate contact, a shared agent, or simply a copied entry. Oprah Winfrey, media figure, reported in some published address book material. Gatekeepers to narrative and public attention are often present in the kind of directories Epstein kept. A contact entry does not indicate wrongdoing. It indicates that Epstein valued access to major communicators. Katie Couric, journalist, reported in some contact list compilations. Media names appear in such directories because they represent influence. Public materials do not demonstrate wrongdoing from the listing. The unknown is whether Epstein ever had real access or simply wanted the possibility. This chapter can feel like a hall of mirrors, fame reflecting fame, names reflecting names. But the sober point is simple. Epstein sought credibility by touching the edges of respected fields, and the documents, messy as they are, show how many people existed in the same rooms, on the same planes, or in the same contact books, without those documents explaining what happened next. Chapter 6. The Inner Circle and Aftermath. Now we enter the closer orbit. Assistants, fixers, recruiters, as alleged, household staff, and the legal and investigative aftermath that caused names to surface. This is where the record feels less like social trivia and more like a system. Still, we keep our language careful. Alleged means alleged. Reported means reported. An absence of charges is not proof of innocence or guilt. It is simply the limit of what the public record shows. Ghislaine Maxwell. Again, because her role is foundational. Reporting and court proceedings described her as coordinating recruitment and social access, and she was convicted on trafficking-related counts. Her name appears across the paper trail because she operated as a hub. The known is legal, a jury verdict and documented association. The disputed in public debate is what institutions should have seen earlier. Sarah Kellen, reported as a key administrative figure who scheduled appointments and managed communications. Her presence in address books and accounts is part of how the machine operated day to day. Public reporting has placed her near logistics that accusers described. What remains unknown in public documentation is the full extent of her knowledge and agency at each moment. Nadia Martsinkova, reported as a long-term associate present around travel and residences. Allegations about her role have circulated in civil contexts, and reporting has described her as part of a small group around Epstein. Without a public criminal conviction tied to those specific claims, the status remains contested in a legal sense. Still, the repeated mentions show that multiple sources placed her close to the center. Maria Farmer, artist and early accuser, whose accounts have been widely reported and who said she warned authorities and institutions years earlier. Her presence in the paper trail comes from interviews, complaints, and narratives that shaped later understanding of the timeline. Her claims highlight how warnings can be made and ignored. What remains unknown is exactly how each warning was handled internally by each institution. Virginia Geoffrey, accuser, whose allegations became central to unsealed filings and public attention, including claims involving Prince Andrew. She described recruitment and exploitation, and her statements influenced how journalists and courts treated the network question. Some matters settled, some were denied, and many details remained disputed in public. Her role in the record is that she named names and forced a reckoning. Annie Farmer, accuser whose story has been reported as part of broader documentation, including public accounts and legal context. Her inclusion in the public record contributes to a pattern. Multiple individuals describing similar experiences. The paper trail here is human testimony, not a contact entry. What remains unknown is the total number of victims and the full shape of the system. Johanna Sjoberg, accuser whose deposition excerpts and related reporting have been part of public discussion. Her name appears because sworn testimony is one of the clearest ways a narrative becomes public. Testimony can contain allegations, impressions, and recollections that are then debated and contextualized. The known is that these statements exist. The disputed is how each allegation would stand in full adversarial testing. Sharon Churcher, journalist whose reporting contributed to the public understanding of certain allegations and documents. Media names appear in the aftermath because the story became a contest over narrative and evidence. Reporting can surface documents, but it can also amplify speculation, which is why careful reading matters. Her presence reflects the role of journalism in dragging hidden systems into light. Julie K. Brown, investigative journalist, widely reported as a central figure in renewed attention to the 2007 deal and the broader failure of accountability. Her name appears because journalism can become part of the archive. Interviews, obtained records, patterns, and pressure that causes institutions to respond. Reporting is not a verdict, but it can reopen doors that were quietly closed. Vicky Ward, journalist and author, reported to have written early, contested accounts of Epstein's world, including stories that later became part of the public timeline. Her name appears because the aftermath is also a story about narrative control. What was published, what was edited out, and what could not be proved at the time. The record here is media history as much as legal history. Darren Indyke, attorney and executor connected to Epstein's estate, reported in coverage of how legal and financial affairs were handled. His name appears because estates require signatures and courts, especially when the wealth is vast and the scrutiny intense. Public reporting has described legal disputes and administrative steps. The documents show process, not necessarily personal wrongdoing. Richard Kahn, longtime associate, reported in multiple sources as part of Epstein's business environment. Names like this appear because financial structures require managers and intermediaries. Public reporting has examined how money moved and how entities were controlled. The unknown is the full internal decision-making and what was seen or ignored. Adnan Khashoggi, arms dealer and businessman, reported in some narratives about Epstein's early associations and social access. His appearance often functions as part of the story of how Epstein learned to operate among the wealthy. Public documentation varies, and some accounts are historical and second-hand. The known is that such names appear in biographies and reporting. The unknown is the precise depth of connection. Jean-Luc Brunel, again, because his alleged recruitment role has been a major part of international reporting. His name appears in contact materials and in a broader narrative about modeling pipelines and exploitation allegations. He faced legal jeopardy and died before final adjudication, leaving many questions unresolved. The known is reported association. The disputed is the full legal truth of allegations. Ehud Barak, again because his documented visits and meetings were widely reported and publicly explained by him. In the aftermath, the question is not only did you meet, but why meet after conviction, and what did you believe you were engaging with? Barak has denied wrongdoing. His name persists because it illustrates how high-level figures assessed risk and chose access. Bill Gates, again because the after-conviction meetings became a public controversy. Gates has described regret and poor judgment. The record shows that Epstein continued to seek legitimacy even after legal consequences. The unknown is why Epstein remained persuasive to so many. Leon Black, again, because payments became one of the most tangible, documentable connections in the aftermath. Investigations and board-level reviews turned a private advisory relationship into a public governance crisis. Black's statements framed the relationship as professional. Critics framed it as inexplicable. The paper trail is the point. Checks, transfers, timelines. Alan Dershowitz, again because he is a central figure in the legal aftermath, with public denials and litigation that made documents and accusations more visible. His appearance in the record is both as an alleged participant by some accusers and as a high-profile defender attacking those allegations. The known is that his name was in the dispute. The disputed is the truth of specific claims. The aftermath becomes its own kind of document. David Boies, attorney known for major cases, reported to have been involved in legal matters connected to Epstein-era litigation. Legal names appear because lawsuits are a major mechanism for surfacing documents. The record can include letters, depositions, and settlement terms that otherwise would remain private. The unknown is what was never filed, never unsealed, or resolved quietly. Brad Edwards, attorney representing victims in some cases, reported widely in coverage of litigation and advocacy. His name appears because he became a public voice, arguing that systems protected Epstein. The paper trail includes motions and court appearances that helped keep attention on the story. The known is his role as counsel. The unknown is the full set of facts still sealed or unreported. Alex Acosta, former US Labor Secretary and US Attorney, reported as a key figure in the controversial 2007 non-prosecution agreement. His name appears because documents and reporting have scrutinized prosecutorial decisions and the extent of leniency. Acosta defended decisions at times, while critics argued the deal was an institutional failure. The known is that a deal existed. The disputed is why it was structured as it was. Roy Black, criminal defense attorney, reported in many accounts as part of Epstein's legal representation during the era of the Florida case and the negotiations that produced the controversial agreement. Lawyers appear in this paper trail because they write letters, broker terms, and shape outcomes that can keep facts sealed or exposed. Representation does not make a lawyer a participant in a client's crimes, but it does make them part of the historical machinery. Kenneth Starr, attorney and former independent counsel, reported to have joined Epstein's defense team in the 2019 federal case. His name appears as an example of how high-profile legal talent can be recruited to defend a person whose reputation is already radioactive. The presence of famous counsel is not proof of any underlying allegation. It is a signal of resources, strategy, and the seriousness of legal stakes. Jeffrey Berman, former US Attorney for the Southern District of New York, whose office was involved in key phases of Epstein-related prosecution and the public proceedings around it, as reported in mainstream coverage. Names like this appear because institutions are staffed by individuals, and the public often seeks someone to blame or praise. The record shows roles and timelines. It does not automatically reveal what each person knew internally. James Comey, former FBI director, whose name appears in related contexts through family connections and employment history, as reported in certain media narratives. It is essential to avoid insinuation. a family tie or employment link is not proof of criminal involvement. Still, names appear in the aftermath because the public looks for patterns. The unknown is what any such peripheral connections actually meant, if anything. Maureen Comey, prosecutor involved in Epstein-related cases, reported in media coverage of the legal proceedings. Her name appears because prosecutions are built by identifiable teams, and accountability becomes personal in public debate. The record shows role, not wrongdoing. The aftermath turns legal professionals into part of the public story. Jeffrey Epstein's pilots, often referenced in reporting because flight logs exist and because staff can confirm routes and habits. Individual pilots have been named in some public sources, and they appear because their records are mechanical and consistent. A pilot name in a document usually indicates employment, not complicity. The unknown is what any staff member saw and reported, and when. House managers and assistants, similarly, are reported in various accounts because large residences require staff, and staff become witnesses by proximity. Their names can appear in depositions or investigative reporting. Being employed is not the same as participating in crimes, but employment can place someone near critical moments. The unknown is always what was noticed, what was normalized, and what was feared. The survivors, collectively, are the most important names in the entire record. Even when some remain anonymous in filings, their accounts are why the paper trail matters at all, because documents without human truth become trivia. The public record includes allegations, corroborations, denials, settlements, convictions, and unanswered questions. The aftermath is still unfolding because sealed materials, institutional reviews, and new reporting continue to shape what the world believes it knows. And so, the list remains what it always was: a set of appearances, not a set of verdicts. Some names are there because they enabled the system, some because they were caught in its gravity, some because they fought it, and some because Epstein wanted them as trophies. The careful viewer holds two ideas at once: that patterns can be real and that documents can mislead when stripped of context. In the quiet space between those ideas, we can do something rare. We can look steadily and still refuse to accuse without proof. This was a quiet archive story where the story ends, sleep begins,